increasingly more antagonistic and belligerent in their dollar holdings.
But maybe we can have a Harvard lawyer read off a teleprompter and fancy pants the Chinese. But I want to go back before you continue on the MERS situation. Isn't it more like you put a chicken, feathers and all, into a grinder, you take the goop out, and you feed it to a mentally retarded rat, and then you take what the rat vomits, and then you take a photograph of the rat vomit, and then you sell that as a chicken McNugget? I mean, wouldn't that be more what MERS is and all of this? Because, you know, they might sell it 5, 10, 15 times, credit default swaps, buckets of completely worthless stuff they sold to the public, the pension funds, the Chinese, the Europeans, everybody else. Of course, this is the globalists who say America. Sure, the swindlers running things here allowed this to happen. And then you've got the general public running around who are being fed on photographs of the goop. I mean, it's too much to say it's just goop, you know, like a chicken McNugget. Isn't it just a photograph of the goop?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. In other words, the catch-all phrase that is used to describe this market is the derivatives market. Derivatives, meaning that the entity, the thing that we're selling you, the value derives from something else. And as you just described, the value that is being used to derive the current value is based on something else that it too is a derivative of something from another value, which it too has a derivation from another value. So there's this whole chain of derivatives stacked up on top of each other. And as you say, it might as well be just a photograph of rat vomit coming out of the anus of a chicken McNugget for all the value that these things have. But they are able to use the law. This is another key part of the racket, because we're talking about a criminal syndicate, a racketeering problem here. You've got banks manufacturing these fraudulent documents and then packaging them as bond-related securities to other banks in foreign countries. Then you get the Justice Department to sign off on this as being somehow legally precedent. Now, we have evidence of this just last week. When the story first broke, what did J.P. Morgan immediately try to do? They immediately got Congress and the Senate passed this bill, which lowered the standard for notary qualification for a mortgage. They got that passed in 24 hours. Now, Obama put a pocket veto. He stopped this from becoming law. But within 24 hours, when caught stealing, the banks got a law passed in the Senate within 24 hours. To put that into context, the America's been trying to get decent health care for 20 years. They can't get a single bill through Congress that represents decent health care. Here the banks, in 24 hours, got the president, a bill in front of the president to radically transform the entire financial legal framework to allow the banks to lower the standard for the notary authorization on mortgages to cover their butts. I mean, does that not a clear indication that the White House is just a branch office of J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs?
Well, it certainly shows the Democratic Congresses, and along with the Republicans, and we know Ron Paul has exposed all this. You've exposed it. We know that Barack Obama got 4 or 5 times the money from Wall Street McCain did. Not that McCain was good. It's just that Obama was going to be their man to kind of con people to go back to sleep. But why did Obama do something right? I think this may be the only thing he's ever done right. What I've been told by a lot of experts I agree with is he did the pocket veto. He didn't outright veto it, and they're going to pass it after the election. So we'll forget about this outrage with the lame duck Congress that's coming up. It's going to give us some derivatives of not just chicken, but of duck a la Maine for us. So why do you think Lord Obama did that?
I think he was buying time, for sure. It's a hot button issue, and he bought some time. But in this case, with this fraud collapse, the problem is that it's spilling over into the global financial markets, and it's triggering this currency war. And the easiest way for a country like China to exercise, to hit the attack button is to buy gold bullion, because when gold bullion and silver bullion start to appreciate in value, it causes a total dislocation in portfolios around the world out of dollars and into precious metals and other assets. And last week, China increased their gold position. All the central banks are now net buyers of gold, and gold has become the key component in this currency war.
Okay,
and
Max, I want to get into all that, and I interrupted you. I want you to go back into the mortgages in layman's terms, how the fraud works. I'm going to give you the floor. So just I'm not going to interrupt you for about 10 minutes. I want you to go over that. I want you to talk about the players, any systems of responding to this fraud and corruption, any ideas you have on that front. We're going to open the phones up later in the hour, but you have forecast all this. But starting off, you heard my point at the start of the hour when you joined us from Paris, and that is, it's one thing to intellectually know all this and to have you telling us this 3 years ago and others telling us years ago, and having economists like George Humphrey on 11 years ago when they passed Glass-Steagall laying out everything that was happening. We know this private banking consortium did this by design. They ran it from England and the United States. And, I mean, all of this is true and obvious, and it's going to destroy global confidence everywhere. And I don't think even you and I consciously or physically realize, and other people out there, that this ton of bricks, we're kind of like Wile E. Coyote watching the whole cliff break off and drop from 5,000 feet, but it ain't hit us yet. I mean, all of this is just a prelude, so go into how you see this unraveling. But go over it all, Max Keiser of MaxKeiser.com.
Well, to get to the last part first, when will it all unravel? The mask that prevents the repercussions from hitting ties into the fact that the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, and commodities and oil is priced in dollars, and America is therefore insulated because that's the country of origin of the world reserve currency. So most Americans don't really have any experience of the extreme volatility and uncertainty and economic problems that the rest of the world has, because they have the benefit of living inside the echo chamber that is the world reserve currency. The sword comes down and chops off that bubble mentality once the dollar loses that status. And so this is happening in real time now, and this mortgage crisis is getting that ever closer. And the mortgage crisis is basically just a crisis of fraud, forgery, and counterfeiting. That's what this mortgage crisis is all about. Wall Street and the banking system, they make money by circulating paper, and you get fees in circulating paper. That's how you make money as a banker. So the more paper you can create, the more fees you can charge, and the bigger the bonus you can give yourself. Notice that this year, Wall Street is giving themselves the biggest bonus pool in their history of $144 billion, even though the economy itself has shrunk remarkably over the past 2 years. Unemployment's up, and every measure of economic activity in the U.S. is down. Wall Street's giving themselves the biggest bonus pool, $144 billion, in their history. How did they do that? Because they were able to increase the supply of worthless paper in the system by trillions, tens of trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars worth. And so a mortgage, at the end of the day, what is it? It's a piece of paper. And once you create a piece of paper and you circulate it, you can charge a fee. So in this regard, it's just the same as counterfeiting. What is counterfeiting? I take a piece of paper, I make it look like legitimate paper, and I circulate it. If I circulate it, I get paid on that paper. These are fraudulent mortgages. These are counterfeit mortgages. They were conceived illegally. They are circulating in the system for the benefit of getting a fee. Now, to further insulate the banks from having any responsibility from counterfeiting and circulating fraudulent mortgages, the banks came up with the scheme of collectively packaging a lot of fraudulent mortgage securities into a so-called mortgage-backed security. And it goes by different names, like a collateralized debt obligation or various other acronyms to describe these flora and fauna of derivatives on Wall Street. And they came up with this idea because they realized that if they could package all these fraudulent mortgages into a new quasi-security that looked kind of like a bond, and they sold that bond to another bank or another pension fund, which is where a lot of this toxic waste resides today, which will create a huge pension crisis, because once all these mortgages are marked to market for their true value of zero, then people who thought they had a pension will realize they don't have a pension. But once they sold all this stuff into a pension account or another bank's balance sheet, they took all liability off their balance sheet. So they no longer have that debt on their books. So they're clean. They're laundering their debt problem in the international derivatives market, and they're laundering their debt problem and their fraud problem and their counterfeiting problem by dumping all this toxic junk into pension accounts and other banks' balance sheets. The only thing, having described in that way, that the question that would come up is, why would another bank buy another bank's toxic mortgage debt? And the answer to that is, you have to look at this as a criminal syndicate. These banks collude with each other, so that at the end, so a bank that sells 10 or 20 or $30 billion worth of toxic mortgage sludge to another bank, the bank that's buying that, their understanding between all the bankers is that they too will simply repackage that with some other securities and resell to another bank for a fee. And you create this global daisy chain of collusion where banks are constantly selling to each other the same garbage back and forth over and over again for the fees that go into the $144 billion end-of-the-year bonus pool. And they know that if the music stops, if the day comes, as it did in 2008, when there is a reckoning that they can simply get their insiders like Hank Paulson to go in front of Congress, put a gun to their head and say, give us $750 billion or we're going to declare martial law. As the minutes from those meetings reveal, that was what was being threatened if they did not give them the $750 billion to bail out only the bankers and do absolutely nothing about the people who were victimized. The victims of this crime, the American people, the taxpayers, are being victimized in 3 or 4 ways. Number one, their housing market is being destroyed, and people are losing their house. And even if you paid 100% on your house, it doesn't make any difference. Bank of America will still foreclose on you, as they did 2 weeks ago for people who bought houses for cash. Or J.P. Morgan will still sneak in through the window or break down your door and try to get you to pay off some delinquent payments that they have absolutely no authority to do so. They'll just come into your house and terrify you right in your house. So the American people are being victimized in their housing market. Number two, as I just described, the American people's pension funds are being decimated because they all have all this toxic junk, which has yet to be fully marked to market, which means that they carry it on the books for 100 cents on the dollar. It's probably worth 0 cents on the dollar. That's the second way they're going to be victimized.
Well, Max.
Three, the U.S. dollar. Once the Chinese and other countries wake up to the fact that they too are holding worthless junk, they're going to create a force majeure, a buying panic in gold and precious metals, which will destroy the U.S. dollar and thus destroy America's purchasing power and make America a second or third or fourth world country. So the U.S. taxpayer is being victimized in multiple ways. All these banks are complicit in a huge mortgage fraud global syndicate. It's part of the crisis from 2008. We never left the crisis of 2008. And Obama, unfortunately, is shown zero leadership. The man, as far as I can tell, is a hologram. There's not even flesh and blood there. He's just some kind of weird projection of Dick Cheney's worst tendencies, and he unfortunately has given the American people absolutely no leadership whatsoever.
Max, simply put, they have announced that they do plan to hyperinflate the currency. And as you said, they're announcing that they will be taking the pension funds and keeping them safe for us. These people will run the United States and the world into a complete third world style collapse. They have been amassing giant paramilitary force against the people ahead of this scam, and in their own IMF World Bank documents planning it for decades. They believe this is their financial takeover of the planet. And do you think that the American people are going to go along with this? I mean, yesterday, even local news was talking about Yes, the Army's going to be on the streets now to make sure you behave yourself. None of this was really for Al-Qaeda. It was all for you. We're going to gang rape you. We're the criminal government. I mean, it's insane.
Well, you know, if you look at somebody like Eric Prince, who was the head of Blackwater, and Blackwater, of course,